Bada boom. Okay. So I was saying, yes, this is the yogi's social life, and that is, when you hang out with people, you share what's on your mind, and that comes out through words. So words can be spoken, but they can be written. What's wrong with writing them? I mean, in some ways, writing them is, you get to be a bit more thoughtful, and you don't blurt things out, right? So in some ways, writing is a more reliable and thoughtful way of exchanging views. So when we do svadhyaya, we are engaging the minds of great beings. I mean, Upanishads have been around 2,500 years. You think Karl Marx will be around in 2,500 years? Maybe, but unlikely. So these great teachers, right? Jesus Christ, the Buddha. I mean, what else sticks around that long? Okay, Plato, Aristotle, fine, but they're great beings too. So this is a kind of, I think of it as my social life. And Sangha, many traditions stress Sangha. Patanjali doesn't, because Patanjali is a solitary tradition, right? You even will see in the Upanishads, proto-Patanjalian yoga, earliest form. Patanjali says Anushasanam. He's continuing in the teachings. And we'll see the earliest expression in the Shvetashvatara and the Katha Upanishad in about 2 or 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks. We'll see that proto-yoga, proto meaning an earliest, barely developed, sort of when we glimpse at something in the hoary past, we call it proto, like proto-Indo-European. Sometimes it's reconstructed, we don't even have it. But when we look at proto-yoga or very, very early yoga, it's solitude. The yogi, because of course it is. Chitta-vritti Nirodha, you're not going to hang out in the middle of the New Jersey Turnpike and do that, are you? You're not going to hang out in the sort of Trafalgar Square. So the Chitta-vritti Nirodha practice does not, Patanjali does not stress Sangha, but all the other paths do. Bhakti most especially. You do kirtan, you do it in Sangha, in community. Pujas, all of that. And Jnana Yoga too. A little bit more sort of jnana oriented, a little bit more ascetic, but the Sangha is there. So most yogic paths, other than Patanjali, which is a complete and utter Nirodha path, there's Sangha, there's association. You have to associate with like-minded people, otherwise you think you're weird. You start thinking you're weird. If you're developing what the tradition says as signs of wisdom, the therapist will say you're depressed. What are the signs of wisdom? Oh, life is frustrating. Sarvam dukkam, right? Everything is suffering. First noble truth, Patanjali, bang, right in the middle. I think it's the most important verse in Patanjali. Sarvam dukkam. Life is suffering. Desires are unfulfilling. Material world is unsatisfactory. You start talking like that to your therapist, and they give you Valium. So you hear we want to talk about clash of cultures. It's yoga and boga, yoga and consumer culture. So the signs of the development of wisdom and knowledge and sort of a real beginning signs of yoga practice are you're inclined towards solitude. Same in the Gita. You don't want to waste time in frivolous social activities, which are not real, they're not deep, they're not really profound. So in that case, then what is the social life of the yogi? It's svadhyaya. I think of it that way, and in fact, my teacher used to say, he says that Sangha, don't think it means just people that you associate with yogis. It might mean that, but the Sangha is with the sacred texts. So if we develop a taste for this svadhyaya, we're very fortunate, because then instead of just wasting our mind energy, we have a mind. We get a lifetime to decide what to do with the mind. So instead of just using that uselessly in sort of superficial, watching television, reading nonsense things, whatever it might be, frivolous social life, if we use that mind to commune with the sages through the texts and the traditions they've left us, then we're in a much better shape at the moment of death. To have, if we practice that during life, we're a much better place at the moment of death for our mind to be in a, if we practice situating the mind in deep knowledge, in deep wisdom through the texts, right? Because wisdom isn't some magic thing that pops up in the mind out of nowhere. Like anything else, wisdom enters into the mind through the senses, like anything, like desires, like anything. It enters into the head, it enters into the mind. There's no magic. There's no magic. Nothing comes from nowhere, right? That's no metaphysical or physical tradition says that, other than Christianity, which says that the creation ex nihilo, from nothing, God created. No Indian thinker would have given that any serious consideration for that. Things cannot just come from nothing. Of course, a Christian can say, well, God can do anything. So there's an answer to that. But at least on the Indian side of the fence, there was never, never, ever. Right from the Brihadaranyaka that we're studying. The Chandogya, we'll read it. Some say, my son, that sat comes from asat, that being comes from not being, and they're just not even engaged. But how can that be, my son? How can something come from nothing? He just immediately rejected, and no philosopher from that point on ever took seriously the proposal that something could come from nothing. All of which is to say then that if we want to be wise, if we're interested in being sort of wise beings in the world, and God knows that there's a dearth of them, and it's everyone's responsibility, yours and mine, then that wisdom doesn't magically pop out of nowhere. It's cultivated. And how is it cultivated? One of the most powerful ways of cultivating it is imbibing it, putting it in the mind through svajaya. That's how desires get in. You watch telly and you see an ad and you think, oh, that's very nice, let me go and buy that. So then you have a desire for that product. How did it get in there? Well, came in through your eyes or your ears. Everything that is in the mind comes in through the senses. How else is it going to get in there? No magic. But wisdom is no different. Okay, so svajaya then is a powerful social life, and the yogis relish it. So thank you, all of which is to say thank you for this Sangha. And we'll start with an invocation and then dive straight into the Brihad. Brihad, the great Aranyaka, forest Upanishad. If you have a teacher or a samskara related to Ishvara or some higher being, you're just existing in your chitta, all of that, it doesn't magically manifest. If you have a sense of God or if you have a sense of Ishvara, it got in there somehow from reading, from studying, from maybe made contact with some. Howsoever, it has to come in to the mind through the eyes, through the senses. So if in this life, or perhaps you were born with it from a past life, you have a samskaric possibility or a samskaric to a notion of Ishvara, then invocations are the time to bring that to mind. In the tradition, I'm telling you, the tradition does. You do whatever you want. The tradition, you invoke the teacher, and then in Vedanta, and at least in the Vedanta traditions, then you also invoke your teacher, and then you invoke the form of Ishvara that has captured your heart. That form of Ishvara that entered your eyes, entered your ears, from reading the stories, from listening to the teachings. Then if you have a bhakti disposition, Ishvara manifests and captures your heart in a particular form. So if that's happened to you, then bring that to active in the mind, manifest it. And that's why we do yogena chittasya padena vacham. That's why we do these invocations, because they give us little props, they give us little building blocks so that we can make a samskaric image in the mind, like a deity made of mind stuff, made of samskaras, right? Why not? Deities can be made of stone, they can be made of sound, they can be made of mind stuff. Okay, and then so the teacher and Ishvara, Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umilitam Yena. And notice the last line of most of the invocation, there'll be a Namaha type word. I don't know if I shared that with you last week. I get muddled with all the workshops, and I don't remember who I said to, but it doesn't matter. It's like asana, you just do it again and again. So notice the last line of the invocation, there'll be a Namaha, or Anato, or Namas. They're all coming from the root nam. Even Anato, it doesn't sound like the M is not there because the M gets dropped in the past passive participle. So Anato is the past passive participle of the same root nam with the prefix a. So you'll notice that in the last lines. You bring the teacher to the mind, you bring Ishvara to mind, the invocation hits some high points. Oh, you who did this, or you who did that, or you have a form like this, so you have these qualities, that qualities, bang, bang, bang. 3 lines as you hit some of the prominent things, and then what do you do once you have the deity in mind? What do you do? What do you do? You have the guru, walk away? You do a namaha. What do you do if you walk in the temple? What do you do a namaha? So the invocation is no different, my friends. The temple line is the temple. So pay attention to the nam in the last line. Om Nagyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. And now this next one is actually in the first line. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shimate Bhakti Vedānta Swami Ite Namine. It's the first word and the last word. Get sandwiched in there. Namine. Say nam. Namaste, first word. Namaste Sarasvati Deve. Gauravani Prachadine. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatta Deshatari. Akanda Mandalakaram. Yena Vyaptam Characharam. Tat Padam Darshitam Yena. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhur Nityanandasya Advaita Vedānta Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Brahma doesn't have a Namaha. There's a big list of names. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhur Nityanandasya Advaita Vedānta Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hey Krishna, Karuna Sindhu, Dina Bandhu, Jagatpate, Gopesha, Gopika Kanta, Radha Kanta, Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe, Vrindavaneshwari, Vrishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami, right? It's in the middle of a verb there. Pranamami. Ha 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 ha. Tricky, it's in the verb, but it's there. Pranamami Hare Priye. Radharani, the Queen of Vrindavan. You have Radharani on your side, you got Krishna. Krishna's back, you don't have to worry about Krishna. Yeah, Radha's on your side, that's it. Krishna does whatever she wants. All right, where were we? Oh, let's do one you know. Yogena Chitasya Tadena Vacham Malam Shurirasya Chavaidya. Okay, this is Patanjali Guru, right? Guru, one who teaches. What did he teach? Yogena Chitasya, number 1. What else did he do? Padena Vacham. That's not bad grammar. Malam Shurirasya Chavaidya. How about that? Brought some Ayurvedic knowledge. We don't have any reference. We don't have any. That hasn't surfaced. But there's no Patanjali who that we know of that has associated with Ayurveda. But we do have Patanjali the grammarian. And the case can be made it's the same one as who wrote the Yoga Sutras. So that's Guru. Malam Sharirasya Chavaidya yo apakarot tam pravaram muninam Patanjalim. Pranjalir, wait for it. Anatosmi, that's a nam. Anato is a past passive participle. Abahu Purusha Akaram Shankha Chakra Asidharinam. This is Patanjali's Ishvara now. Many of these beings that are associated with the sort of with the knowledge systems of ancient India are often considered to be unkshas, which are kind of like partial, not full, but partial manifestations of Ishvara. So Shesha is a partial manifest, the thousand-headed, wonderful thousand-headed being. We could say snake, but that doesn't really do justice. Serpent, perhaps, is a better word. And that's a partial manifestation of Vishnu, who then reclines on Shesha at the beginning of each cosmic cycle. So Abahu Purusha Akaram, Shankar Chakra Asidharinam, Sahasra Shirsha Shvetam, Pranamami Nam in the middle, Pranamami Patanjalim. Finally, Apavitra Pavitro Va, Sarva Vastha Gatopi Va, Ya Smaret Pundarika Ksham, Sa Bhaya Plantara Shaji. And when we get to be a little bit more friendly and cozy, I will, if you're interested, translate some of those implications. So let's screen share. And is that it? Yeah. And we're in the Bṛhadāraṇyaka, the earliest of the Aranyakas. Based on the language, we can say things like that. Of course, remember the tradition would not be comfortable with this idea of earlier and later, because the tradition, these are divine texts that are revealed at the beginning of the creation, or with one school in particular, they're eternal. They're not even re-delivered at the beginning of each creative cycle. So they wouldn't think like an academic does in terms of history and chronology and all these things that academe consists of. Characterize academic study. Academics don't believe these are divine texts. They believe they're human products. Well, if they're human products, and then they're chronological and all written by the same person. So academics see the difference in language and the development of language and all of that. You don't have to. It doesn't matter. What does it matter if they give you moksha, if they give you bhakti? Then they've done their dharma, and then the texts have done their dharma. They've fulfilled their purpose. Just so you know, there's an academic way of thinking about things and a traditional way. So I'll be using traditional mode, but every so often I'll say something like, well, academics would say this, that, or the other. So here's Gargi. I think we did this, didn't we? Did we do this? 3.8?
Yeah, we finished with that.
Yes.
We did that. Excellent. So we move on to the next one. And we'll have questions, remember, at the end. We do 2 solid hours. Then Vidagdha Shakalya began to question him. And I mentioned, didn't I? There are scholars who are Marxists. They look at the text through a Marxist lens. So they don't see what a Vedantin sees. Vedantin sees Brahman and Ātman and sees information about how to reconnect the Ātman with Brahman in some sort of way and attain liberation from suffering. But a Marxist historian, he doesn't believe in an Atman, doesn't believe in an afterlife, doesn't believe in a Brahman. These are all human products. They're all whoever controls the modes of production, Marx would have said, or whoever's dominating the society to make stuff up that we call religion. And Marxists, I read a book, and it's actually quite interesting, that the Vidagdha Shakalya is associated with one of the kingdoms in the Upanishads themselves, is associated with the king, and Yajnavalkya with another king, and he sees a kind of a tension. He sees in these kinds of debates, the kind of Vidagdha is taking a humble position vis-a-vis Yajnavalkya, because Yajnavalkya is instructing Vidagdha, and he sees kind of tension between political rivals. So that's a Marxist way of reading the text. And it's interesting, but it's not going to give you moksha. If you're looking for moksha, better you stick with Vedanta. So Vidagdha Shakalya began to question him. Tell me, Yajnavalkya. Yajnavalkya is the most famous sage, rishi, a seer of tattva, of thatness, of truth, right? The nature of that. Tattva. So the rishis are the seers of truth. They see things. We read about it, and we sort of cultivate it, and we try to change our lens so that we can slowly start to try to see it that way. But the rishis have attained that. They see reality, they see the truth that we don't. Right? Just like physicists, they, you know, they have to use instrumentation, but they can see perhaps, you know, the subtle, you know, I don't know if they can see atoms actually, but they can see subtle physical entities that we can't see. Right? And certainly they think about it that way. Even if you can't see an atom, but you can infer its existence, and you can't see subatomic particles. So a physicist is thinking about reality in a very different way than you and I. So likewise with the rishi. It's perceiving, not just theorizing it, but perceiving reality in a different way. So Yajnavalkya is the most famous rishi then in the Upanishads. So the big doctor says, how many gods are there? Remember, what's the mainstream religion? Vedanta doesn't care about gods. It doesn't reject them. But the gods are the celestials. They're just beings with good karma. And the mainstream religion of the day is Vedic ritualism. Keep this in mind. It's always lurking about in the background. It's just like we have yoga in the West now, but what's the mainstream religion behind? Yoga comes over in the 60s, but what's the mainstream religion? It's Christianity. I mean, people may or may not be Christians, but that's the cultural religion of the yoga comes into a different cultural milieu where Christianity, and so the first teachers had to use Christian terms to make parallels with Upanishadic terms. So they had to use God, they had to use soul, which are not appropriate, because the notion of God in a Western theological tradition, the notion of the soul does not map on very precisely. But to begin with, you've got to use something. Right now, now we're more informed, we can use the Sanskrit terms, right? So the yoga is going on, and the mainstream religion is the Vedic ritualistic religion, fire sacrifice. Think Greco-Roman, Indo-European cult of the fire. India was not exactly like that, but cognate, like the languages are connected, the cultures are connected. It goes back to some ancient, we don't know where or how, it's in prehistory. An ancient community where the fire sacrifice was central, and there was a sense of celestial beings, and that one could influence through ritual. So that's the Vedic culture. Far more elaborated, far more sophisticated than anything in the Greco-Roman tradition, right? Where you cut a bull open, pull out his entrails. They're much more sophisticated than that, my friends. Highly intricate, pronunciation had to be immaculate for the yajna to work, for the sacrifice to work. The sacrifice is called yajna. And the goal is to attain the celestial realm. The Vedic ritualist is not interested in liberation. And the Vedanta critiques that. Say, you know, okay, you can get to the celestial realm. They don't reject that possibility, but they say, but if it is the case that X units of good karma and perfectly performed ritual, if X units of that gets you to a celestial realm, what happens when X units run out? If I got $1 million and I think, oh, that's going to last forever. If I go to Hawaii and I stay in $1,000 a night hotel, we'll do the math, my friends. How long can I stay there? Celestial realm is like that. So the gods, so nonetheless, if you're teaching yoga, just like if you're teaching yoga in the West, you have to use the terms of, you know, that were known, like God and soul. So the gods and the ritual, there's lots of references to them in the Upanishads, not because the Upanishads are promoting Vedic ritualism, nor are they promoting, you know, the goal of life as attaining a celestial realm, because it's temporary. But they use that language. And here's an example where the gods are minimized without being rejected. Vedanta accepts that there are gods, celestial beings. Of course, there's a supreme, Ishvara, but we'll get to that later in the Upanishad. So how many gods are there? So Yajnavalkya says, as many as mentioned in the ritual invocation with the Lord to the all gods. That's a Vedic ritual invocation. That would be Sahasrashid, Shah, Purushaha, Sahasraksha, Sahasrapat, right? This is one of the most famous Rig Vedic hymns that was recited at the all gods. Sarabhumin Vishva, beautiful to hear the Vedic chants. To the Lord, the hymn. So as many as mentioned in that ritual, he answered, in accordance with this very ritual invocation. How many does it say in that ritual? He's quoting the Vedas now. Well, there's 33,303 gods. So Vedanta says, yes, of course, he says. You can notice a little bit of sarcasm. Yeah, we know that. Just the Vedic people say that. He says, but really, Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there? So Yajnavalkya goes, well, all right, 33. It's like shopping in India. How much is it? Oh, it's 33,000 rupees. Oh, come on, how much is it? All right, 33 rupees. So same little thing. How many gods are there? 33. Yes, of course, he said, but really, Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there? All right, then 6. Yes, of course, he said, but really, Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there? 3. Yes, of course, but how many are there really? 2. All right, but really, Yajnavalkya, how many are there? 1.5 then. Yes, of course, he said, but this is typical Upanishadic pedagogy, because you'll remember this. Don't think this is repetitive in a sort of as a flaw. I've mentioned this before and I'll mention it again. In written exposition, it's a flaw to be repetitive because you can just go back 5 pages and check something you missed. You can't do that in oral exposition. You can't go back and check something. So you want to hear it again and again and again. And this pedagogic method is, is meant to sort of that we really imbibe the point. And what's the point? Well, we're not there yet. Yes, of course, but really, Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there? 1. Well, yes, of course, you said, but then who are those, 33,303? They're only the powers of the god. You remember, they don't reject the gods. They're just the powers of the gods, Yajnavalkya. There are only 33 gods. Well, who are they? And now he lists the celestials, the 8 Vasus, the 11 Rudras, these are forms of Shiva. 12 Adityas, that makes 31. And Indra, that's like Zeus, the chief of the celestial, Prajapati. Okay, Prajapati is Brahma, not Brahman. Brahma in the later tradition, who's the creator god, the one who's the first yogi in yoga. The very, very first yogi is Brahma, the first being that manifests in the new creative cycle, also bound by karma. And he goes on like this, blah, blah, blah. And he goes on with all of this sort of thing. What's Indra? What are these sacrificial animals? What's the 1.5? And then finally, who is the one God? And this is where the Upanishads want us to end up. And he says breath, because breath is also often used in the early Upanishad as a sort of synonym for Brahman. He is called Brahman. Okay, so that's and that's where the Upanishads want us to end up. That the ultimate cause of everything is not the little gods who are associated with, material functionings, but it's ultimately Brahman who sustains everything. So that's a pretty well-known passage, and we'll move on to the famous Neti Neti, which is okay. So with page 51 over here, I've got so that would be 3928. So 3928. If you've got the Olivelle, that will page 51. And this is famous in the Advaita tradition, later Vedanta. Well, remember that's 2,000 years later. That what can you say about Brahman? What can you say about Brahman? It's beyond. Remember, if you can say something about something, that means you have a samskara of that thing. So if I say to you, say something about, I don't know, your garden. Well, you can say something about your garden because you have imprints from your garden, from your senses contacting your garden, and you look at your garden, and then that sense imprint gets imprinted in the mind as a samskara. And then you go, a couple of days later, I say, well, tell me something about your garden. And then you activate that samskara, the memory comes up, and out come the words. But there's no mental imprint of the Ātman. The Ātman is, for something to be imprinted on the mind, that thing's got to be grosser than the mind. There has to be something denser, made of the gunas, more dense. The mind is more sattvic. So something more subtle than the mind cannot imprint itself. It's just like we can't make an imprint on air even, because it's subtler. We have to make imprints on things like earth, which have earth elements. So what to speak of the Ātman, who is a completely different ontological entity. Completely, it's not made of the 3 gunas. So then, about this self, what can you say then? Well, one can only say, na eti, not this, not this, not this, not this. This is the via negativa, sometimes called, well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not matter, it's not the world out there, it's not air, it's not fire, it's not mind even. It's not even it's not even the very intelligence that's reading these words. It's not even the intelligence that can use reason and logic to deduce that, or induce that there must be an Atman that's distinct from material, that the property of consciousness cannot belong to any material substance. Therefore, it must belong to some other entity. That sort of thinking and inference is logic, but that just tells us that there is an entity. And then we call it something. Well, all we're really saying is it's not this, it's not this. Consciousness is not matter, it's not neurons, it's not subatomic protons. We can't find the subatomic particles in either one or a combination that produces the quality of consciousness. So not this, not this, not this. Okay, it must be something other. That's what's going on here. One can only say na iti, na, and the Sanskrit for not is na iti. Iti means thus, not thus, or we would say not this. Okay, na iti, and that in Sanskrit, when you have an a and an e, it becomes a. So na iti becomes neti. It looks like one word, but it's really two. Neti, na it, neti, neti, neti. Not it's not this. Or is it my thoughts? Na neti, neti. Is ungraspable. You grasp things. What is the Sanskrit? We have 5 instruments of knowledge acquiring instruments and 5 working instruments, and we grasp things with them. The knowledge acquiring instruments, the eyes grasp form, the ears grasp sound, we grasp it. The word is grahana. And these things are the grahana, the grahya is that which is grasped, and the grahaka is the grasper. So the eye grasps form, the ear grasps sound, and so on with the 5 senses. And then our working senses, the hand grasps things, the stomach digests, and the 5 working senses you know from Sankhya. But he's ungraspable. None of this works with the Atman. He can't be grasped. He's undecaying, for he's not subject to decay. He has nothing sticking to him. It's just pure consciousness, like light. Nothing sticks to light. But what to speak of, and that's just a gross physical element. So nothing can stick to him. Although the Jains have this interesting, very unique understanding of karma, the Jains, another tradition in India, which was a significant tradition, a tiny minority. I don't know, there's a few million, it's nothing in India. But unlike Buddhism became a preaching tradition, and it went to Sri Lanka, and then it went to the east, and it went to the west. It was in Afghanistan. You remember when the Taliban blew up the statues? It actually went right into Central Asia. That was Buddhist before Islam came. So places like Kazakhstan, I don't know, Tajikistan, they were Buddhists. But anyway, and it went east, and of course that still remains the case today. So there was so the Buddha was non-Vedika. Although he wasn't necessarily non-Vedika, but later followers, 3 or 4 centuries later, at a certain point, it may have been many, many centuries later, that Buddhists actually then officially and formally, I don't know if it was the Buddhists did this, or the Vedic traditions ostracized the Buddhists and say, well, that's something I'm really interested in. And there's a scholar of early Buddhism in forget where, in Brooklyn, not NYU. He's in New School, not New School. Sunni. He's in a Sunni college, and he does early Buddhism. And I asked him. He came and gave a presentation at Rutgers, which is available on the Rutgers website if you're interested. His presentation on early Buddhism, and he's looking at the names, and all the early Buddhists were Brahmins. There wasn't a sense that they were not Vedic. The names tell you they're still doing their rituals, their Vedic rituals. And he looks at the sermons of the Buddha, and whenever the Buddha is preaching to Brahmins, sometimes historians do really interesting stuff. This is interesting. Whenever the Buddha is teaching to Brahmins, he doesn't talk about the Atman, the soul. He talks about, just general, be a Brahmin, be a real Brahmin, don't be a caste Brahmin, and like that. But anyway, he says that that really it wasn't until the Kumarila, which is like 8th century, and it was Kumarila, the really right-wing Orthodox Vaidika, it was he who kind of then really sort of established these barriers, rejecting Buddhism as not Vedika, and from that point on, then Buddhists with other. But that's a very long time. That's well over a millennia and a half later, my friends. So all of which is to say there were Jains as well, another community like the Buddhists, and they had a rich canonical tradition. They're the ones that you've probably heard of. They've taken ahimsa further than anybody. They're the ones that wear a mask so they don't breathe in microbes. They're the ones you've seen on TV sweeping the road before them so they don't step on ants. So they have this interesting idea of karma that it actually literally sticks onto the Ātman, snigdha. So other than them, nobody would say that. No Vedic school would say anything can stick on the Ātman, because the Ātman, it pervades everything. It's subtler than everything, and therefore it pervades everything. So there's nothing sticking to him, for he doesn't stick to anything. He's not bound, right? The Sankhya Karika is going to say, we think we're bound. We think we're trapped by our vidya. We think we're trapped by the kleshas. Sankhya is going to say, actually, nobody's bound. It's just property dancing. And really, the Ātman is just never been bound. This is a very strange thing to say. But anyway, that's the story for Sankhya. Yet he neither trembles in fear nor suffers injury. Okay, so that's the famous Neti verse. Okay, so then we'll move along to another passage. I'm really picking the passages that are yoga friendly, that are, I think, will be of interest to most of you are, yogis and studying. So then, and we have the same 57. Sometimes the text will repeat, the same teaching, we'll see it twice. And this is kind of a funny one here, but we'll come back to it. A one-legged Brahman, meaning what kind of a Brahman are you? Because he keeps saying, look, here again, you see this kind of there's humor in the Upanishads as well. Let's quickly look at this. Once when Janaka, here we have, remember, if you were a Marxist, you'd be paying attention to this. You're much more interested in kingdoms and kings and rivalry and power. And you'd see this as an example of one kingdom, dominating another. Then once when Janaka, the king of Videha, and of course later tradition would have him as the father of Sita in Sitaram. Later tradition will have Sita as the daughter of Janaka. She's called Janaki, king of Videha. Once when he was formally seated, here's our friend Yajnavalkya again, came up to him. Janaka asked him, Yajnavalkya, why have you come? Are you after cows or subtle disquisition? See the sarcasm there? You're one of these Brahmins that just wants donation. I'm the king, you just come and you pull that Brahmin stuff and now you expect me to give you dan, right? You want cows? What do you want? He replied, both, your majesty. Well, he's pretty upfront about it. Let's hear what they have told you. Brahman is speech. That's what Jitvan Shalini told me, said Janaka. Shalini told you Brahman is speech? Why, that's like someone telling you as a father or mother or a teacher, meaning it's useless. Well, everybody's, what's how is that significant? It's like saying I got a mum and a dad. Well, everybody's got a mum and a dad. Notice the sarcasm and the humor. He probably reasoned, what could a person who cannot speak possibly have? But did he tell you what its abode and foundation are of speech? What does it rest on? He didn't tell me that. Well, then it's a one-legged Brahman, your majesty. He gave you useless information. He gave you a little something, but it's one-legged. What's the point of that? Why don't you tell us that yourself, Yajnavalkya? And then he goes through this thing. We don't need to, it's a little bit esoteric, but I get a sense of the humor here. But so we'll look at the end. Your majesty, the highest Brahman is speech. And we could think of Om actually as, because the later tradition is going to say Om is Brahman. It's a sonic manifestation of Brahman. Brahman is present in the phoneme Om. So you could take that as speech. or you could take it as the Vedas. When a man knows and venerates it as such, I would take it as Om, because the Upanishads are not really interested in the Vedas. Speech never abandons him, and all beings flock to him. He becomes a god and joins the company of gods. Notice how it goes backwards and forwards between the old Vedic, you become a god. That's really what the Vedic ritualist wants. It goes back and forth between that mainstream kind of goal of life, which is the good things in this world and and good things in a celestial realm in the next. It goes backwards and forwards between that frame of reference and the Upanishadic Vedanta one, which is liberation from all of these desires, all of these destinations. Janaka Videha exclaimed, I'll give you 1,000 cows together with bulls and elephants. So anyway, it goes on like this, right? The same pedagogic style, and maybe, with the one-legged Brahman, and we don't need to read it all, but hopefully, and he keeps giving him 1,000 cows and bulls, and he's seeking more and more. Let's see where it all ends up, right? And another 1,000. Maybe Yajnavalkya is just milking him. He's just tempting him. He's giving a little a snippet of information, and every time he gets 1,000 cows, he's going to walk away with about 50,000 cows. All right, and then, all right. So where does it all end up? It's 2, and it all ends up, as these teachings invariably do, about this Brahman, about this self. And then here's the culmination. And here we have the neti. So we have the repetition of what we just had. About this self, Atman. Notice sometimes it goes backwards and forwards. Sometimes it's Brahman, sometimes it's Atman. Usually Brahman is the higher cosmic self and Atman the little self, but they can be used interchangeably. In later tradition, it becomes more fossilized that Atman is the little self in you and I, and Brahman is the foundation, and that from which the universe emanates. And that's how it's defined in the Vedanta Sutra. But in the Upanishads, the two terms are often used in that way, but sometimes they're interchangeable. And the Atman is the big cosmic self, and Brahman is, in occasion, is the little individual self. One can only say neti. He's ungraspable, he can't be grasped, and the same thing. He's undecaying, not subject to decay. And then this finally gets there after he's got about 100,000 cows. And Yajnavalkya had said this. Janaka of Videha replied. After Yajnavalkya had said this, the king, Janaka, said, may that freedom be yours too, Yajnavalkya, you who have taught us that freedom from fear. The only way to be free of fear is to realize that you're the Atman, because fear is connected to the body and the mind. We're afraid that something's going to happen to the body, or something's going to happen to our mind. We're going to be disrespected. We're going to be whatever it is. But freedom of fear can only come from deep contemplation and absorption in the Atman, because the Atman is beyond any physical or mental state. So you have taught us that freedom of fear. So when they say things like that, that's the equivalent of saying you have taught us about the Atman. Namaha to you. There he is now. He's accepting Yajnavalkya as his guru. Namaha to you. These people of Videha, and I myself, here we are at your service. So the king has now surrendered to him as a disciple. Namaha, and of course, along with the king comes the kingdom. So that's not a bad. So kings had, and that's how kingdoms became Shaiva, or kings became Vaishnava, or kingdoms became Vaishnava. Often the king would sponsor debates. If the king wasn't particularly philosophical, the king just wanted the gods on his side, then he would say, okay, bring in the Buddhists, Vaishnava, Shaiva, it's all right, you guys have a debate, whoever wins, I'll build a temple. And that's how you got some of these massive temples in India. And other times the kings were a little bit deeper, a little bit more, serious, a bit more yogically inclined, and they actually did become converted, if you will, or they did become, they came under the, and they became inspired by some great teacher. And then they would build a stupa if it was Buddhist, or like Ashoka, the great Ashoka became Buddhist. And the earliest inscriptions we have in India, the Ashokan inscriptions, and they're written in Pali, which is a late form of Sanskrit, and that's how. And actually, they're written in Greek. There's some of them are 3. There is Pali. I think one of them even has Aramaic and Greek. So some of them are trilingual. which is very good if you're trying to, translate something. And the reason they haven't been able to decipher the Indus Valley script, which is 3000 BC, 3 millennia before Pali. We have a script, and no one knows what it is. And probably until many people have, made claims and they put it through computers, because you put the script through computers and you see, well, what happens if you have certain symbols in the beginning and then the ending changes? Well, that points to a declining language, because a declining language, the first part of the word will be the same and then the ending changes. Purusha, Purusho, Purushaha, Purusham, Purusho, Purushan, Purushena. Notice the Purusha part stays the same. That's the word. Purusha, person. Purushena, Purushatman. Notice the ending changes. Purushabhyam, Purushehe. So that's a declining language. So that would be very important if you're deciphering the Indus script, because that would suggest it's Sanskrit. Because the other languages of India do not decline. So if you could even just show, even without cracking the script, if you could show that that somehow or other the symbols were constant, 2 or 3 symbols were constant, and then the last 1 or 2 symbols changed, that would be huge. That would, in and of itself, would point to Sanskrit, even if you hadn't deciphered it. But and people have done that. There's been some ingenious attempts, but as of yet not accepted by the body of Indologists. Fascinating thing. But anyway, why do we say all that? Ashoka, and so he was a king, and he became influenced by a powerful Buddhist teacher. I forget who it was, and he became a Buddhist. So that's how these big temples got built in these beautiful temples of India. Just a little bit of point of information. I hope you find that stuff interesting. Okay, so we've done Neti Neti. Now we'll go along to page 61. Oh, okay. So here we have our first. Well, maybe, let me wait. Hold off on saying that until we get there. 4.3.21. It is like this. 4.3.15. It is like this. As a man embraced by a woman he loves is oblivious to everything within or without, so this person embraced by the Ātman, consisting of knowledge which is chit, right? Sat Chit Ananda, is oblivious to everything within or without. So Patanjali would call that Swarupa Vasthanam. When you're in that state of Swarupa Vasthanam, consciousness absorbed in its own nature, it's pure consciousness. You're oblivious to everything else, or in the case of Patanjali and yoga, you're not even aware of anything else. You're totally immersed in the Swarupa. Clearly, this is the aspect of his where all desires are fulfilled. Once one has attained the Ātman, no more desires. The bliss of the Ātman is all-encompassing. No interest in anything else. That is a sign of yogic practice, by the way. If you want to sort of gauge our progress as yogis, how free are we becoming from desires? I have a student now going through the Bhagavad Gita, 750 verses. And actually, maybe she's here, Leonore. She looked at how many verses have some teaching pertaining to giving up desire. 150. That's 20. That's 150 out of 750. Do the math. What is that? A fifth. 20%, my friends. It's probably more than that. So this is fundamental to yogic practice, Buddhist, Jain, anything you want. Is this idea that one cannot make progress as long as the mind is caught up with desires, because then the mind's caught up with them. If it's caught up with desires, and it uses its mental activities to pursue those desires and obtain those desires. It's not using its mental activity to seek the self. It's quite simple. You're using the mind in one way, you're not using it in another way. So if our minds are plagued with desires, well, then that's what we do with our life. That's what we do with our mental space. So then we're not doing yoga. Maybe do a bit in the morning. But the way we chart our progress is how free are we becoming from the desires, which is quite the opposite of what a consumer culture wants you to do, by the way. So you're not going to get much help from Bill Gates and people in that project. Okay. Clearly, this is the aspect of his where all desires are fulfilled, where the self is the only desire, right? You have to seek the self. So you have to desire the self. It's called mumuksha. That's a good desire. Patanjali would call it aklishta. Verse number 5, Vrittaya panchaha klishta aklishta. We don't pay enough attention to the aklishta, but there are desires which are good that take you to yoga, and that's the desire for the Atman. So where the self is the only desire, which is free from desires, the other kinds of desires, and far from sorrows. Here, in this place of Atman, a father is not a father. All these are bodily, external, dharmic designations. A father is not a father. A mother is not a mother. Worlds are not worlds. Gods are not gods. Vedas are not Vedas. Here, a thief is not a thief. Notice this, an abortionist is not an abortionist. They had abortion back then. Some people read the Upanishads looking for these looking for these clues about what was the material culture like, what was the social culture. They don't remember. The Vedantin is looking at reading the Upanishads, seeking knowledge of the Atman, but there's different things you could seek depending on your lens. Okay, an outcast is not an outcast. No, now he doesn't see anything here, but although he does not see, he is quite capable of seeing. Meaning consciousness is eternal. It's just not flowing out through the eye. So he's not seeing anything in terms of the object of the eyeball, the object of sight, but he's quite capable of seeing. Consciousness is still consciousness. It's just absorbed in its own nature instead of flowing outward. For it's impossible for the seer to lose his capacity to see. The seer cannot lose the chitti shakti. The seer, drashtuhu, drashtra, does not lose its drishi, as Patanjali calls it. It's drishi shakti. Consciousness can never not be conscious, my friends. You're conscious 24 hours, even in deep sleep. It's just in deep sleep. The mind is in a state of complete tamas, so you're not conscious of anything other than black. The tamasic mind, so you wake up and you think, oh, I had a good sleep. I don't have any memories. Well, you don't have any memories because the mind wasn't active. There's no dreams. So, but the consciousness doesn't go to sleep. I hope we're clear about that. Any more than the light does. If you put a light in a cement box, well, the light doesn't go off. It's in a cement box, so it's just lighting up cement. It's impossible for the seer to lose his capacity to see, for it's indestructible. It's nitya, sanatan. This Atman is eternal. This is like lesson number one. First day in yoga school, ancient India. You go to yoga school, sit down, okay, boys and girls, right? Lesson number 1. Atman is eternal. What's the first teaching of Gita? Atman is eternal. Gita starts 2:11. But before that's battlefield. 2:11, first teaching. Neither you nor I nor these kings will ever cease to be. We're eternal. First thing that comes out of Krishna's mouth when Arjuna's ready, approaches him as a student, 2:11, approaches him, tell me what's my dharma. First thing, and they go, chapter 2, Atman, I, eternal. For it's indestructible. But there isn't a second reality here that he could see as something distinct and separate from himself. When the consciousness is absorbed in his own nature, there's no duality there. So there's no other. So it doesn't lose its capacity to see, but there's nothing to see because the consciousness is absorbed in its own nature. It's not flowing out through the senses and connecting with external objects, or even flowing through the mind and connecting with the external. Still, the mind is still external. Remember Patanjali says, look, the mind is internal compared to the sense objects, but it's still external to consciousness. He says that at the beginning of chapter 3. It's still bahya. It's still outside. So when consciousness is not flowing externally and connecting with either psychic, samskaric objects that we call thought and vrittis, or the world out there, then there's nothing to see then. But it's not that it loses its capacity to see. It just isn't a second reality here that he could see as something distinct and separate from himself. And here we get the sense of non-dualism. Nor does he smell anything. And remember, now he's going to go through all of the senses. Although he doesn't smell, he's quite capable of smelling, for it's impossible to lose that capacity. The capacity is always there in consciousness. Consciousness could potentially always flow back out through the senses and contact the world. never loses that capacity, because the eternal nature of Atman is consciousness. It's just a question of what do you do with that consciousness. There's three things. You either allow it to flow out into the mind, through the senses, the world out there, number one. Or when you are fed up with being frustrated with trying to find happiness out there, then you do Patanjali yoga, which is you close out the world out there, Nirodha, all, and then now consciousness of Svarupa Vasthanam can contact its own nature. So the third thing, which is not strongly developed in the Upanishads, but we'll see it in the Shveta, is consciousness can flow out, but to Bhagavan. And that's bhakti. Flow out and absorb itself in this distinct being called Ishvara, called Bhagavan. Patanjali doesn't develop that at all. It's not part of his teaching. Ishvara and Patanjali is just a prop for the mind. It's just Om, and you do japa. So he goes on. Well, he doesn't taste, but he doesn't lose the capacity to taste. We now become familiar with this sort of repetitive style of the Upanishads. We know why it is, because it's oral exposition. And, by the time you've heard 3 or 4 times, it kind of sinks in. It's like doing asana, right? You do it again and again, downward dog, downward dog, downward dog. And if you're like me, you're like, oh God, enough of this downward dog, downward dog, downward dog, downward dog. But each time you go a little deeper. No, I don't. I just gotta wait. I just look at my watch and wait for class to end. But if you're a proper yoga practitioner, then you go a little deeper. Okay, so he goes on like that. He doesn't think of any. Notice thinking. It's not in consciousness. Although he does not think, that's what Chitta Vritti Nirodha is, my friends. You're not thinking. Although he doesn't think, he's quite capable of thinking, for it's impossible. And it goes on. Doesn't touch, doesn't perceive. And where does he end up with it? Goes on and on and on. And we know where he's going to end up, don't we? And we go down to 31. When there is some other thing, then the one can see the other, the one can smell the other, the one can taste the other, the one can speak to the other. If there's another thing, the one can hear the other, think of the other, touch the other. Now, this is monistic. Some passages in the Upanishads are monistic and some are dualistic. Monism means the Atman merges into Brahman and ceases to be an individual. That's mono. Think of the word mono means one. Like monotonous. We keep saying the same thing. Or monologue. Okay, and so that some passages like this one here. Other passages are dualistic. That the soul is distinct from God, is distinct from another soul. And because the Upanishads make different statements in different places, some sections of the Upanishads are strongly monistic, some Upanishads are dualistic and theistic. That's the reason why you can have different Vedanta schools. Vedanta is post-Upanishads. The Vedanta Sutra was written after the Upanishads in order to systematize the Upanishads by the sage Bṛhadāraṇyaka Vyasa. But it didn't do that. And then after the Vedanta Sutra, then the interpretation of both the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra fractures into the different Vedanta traditions, such as Advaita Vedānta of the great Shankara, Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja, and you will know that from Krishnamacharya and Guruji Iyengar. They belong to that tradition, which is more, there's some dualism there, and then hardcore dualists. So you have different traditions which take very different views on the relationship between Ātman and Brahman. Does it merge or is it distinct? And but here's a monistic passage. He becomes the one ocean. That means he loses his individuality. So Shankara likes this. Advaita likes this passage. This is favorable to Advaita. If we'll do a course on Vedanta Sutra if you guys want to. If you'd like to do that in February or January, then I'll probably send out a message and say, email me if you're interested. But we won't do that. We're not going to get into that now because the Upanishads do not promote one view or the other. They allow both. And it's because they allow both. It's because different passages in the Upanishads Some support monism, some support dualism. That's the very reason why you end up 2 millennia later with, half a dozen prominent Vedanta traditions. And the latest one was the 19th century Swami Narayan. That was even in colonial India. You've heard of the Swami Narayans. They're building the most magnificent temples all over the world. The biggest one in the world is being built right here down the road from me in New Jersey. I'm absolutely amazing. It's going to put the Taj Mahal to shame. I mean, it's stupendous. Go online and check out the Swami Narayan in I think it's Bridgewater, New Jersey. And they haven't built the big temple yet. The big, really big temple. They've got one temple, which is just amazing already, but they haven't built the really big one. That's what's going on at the back. He becomes the one ocean. He becomes the soul sealer. So this is monistic. Okay, are we clear about the terms monism? When the Ātman is one with Brahman. In other words, it ceases to, it's not an Ātman anymore. It's just Brahman. Like, best analogy is a drop of water. What happens to the drop of water when it hits the ocean? It is no longer an individualized drop. It becomes the ocean. So that would be monism. But other traditions say, no, it'd be atomic substructure of the drop of water. The ocean looks like it's all one thing, but actually it's full of subatomic particles. And the Atmans are eternally individual. They never merge. That's a story for another time and for a Vedanta course, if we ever do that. Okay, so let's stick with the Upanishads now. This, Your Majesty, is the world of Brahman, becoming one with the ocean. So did our friend Yajnavalkya instruct him. This is the highest goal of the Upanishads, Vedanta. This is what they want us to, this is what they're trying to communicate to us. The Ātman is the highest goal, my friends. What other goals are there that are not foolish and temporal and unsatisfying? This is the highest attainment. This is his highest world. This is the highest bliss, Ananda. On just a fraction of this bliss do other creatures live. What we think of as bliss, right? What is it? What is it? A cappuccino? What's our bliss? I think so. It's a fraction of that, says the Upanishad. Okay, so on we go. Okay, here now the Upanishad's going to try to quantify. It's being rhetorical. It's going to quantify the bliss of Brahman in a way that kind of will somehow get into our thick heads. So we start off, take among human beings, right? Back then, when someone is successful and rich, ruling over others and enjoying to the utmost all human pleasures, that is the highest bliss of human beings. Now, let's say a king, right? Back then, you probably think a king, has, all right. Now, if somebody do the math, who wants to do the math? B, you want to do it? Got a piece of paper there? Or a couple of you can do it. Beth, you do it too. Let's see. Phyllis, everybody may see if we come up with the same figure. Right, now, this is the highest bliss of human beings, right? Someone who has success, rich, ruling others, enjoying. For the Vedic mind, that was the highest bliss. Now, 100 measures of this, so multiply by 100, equals a single measure of the bliss enjoyed by ancestors who have won their world, some celestial realm. So multiply that, now you've got 100. 100 of that, and he goes up the realm, up to the realms. 100, so you multiply 100 by 100 now, to another realm, ancestors who have won their world equal blah, 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 Gandharvas. Now multiply another 100. 100 measures of that bliss enjoyed by the Gandharvas, these are like angels in Christianity, have wings, equals a single measure of these other kinds of gods, right? 100 measures of that is a single measure of the next realm up. 100 measures of that, I hope someone's multiplying all these hundreds, equal a single measure of bliss in this sort of Prajapati, that's the creator, Brahman. And 100, okay, now we get to the grand finale. 100 measures of bliss enjoyed in the world of Prajapati equal a single measure of bliss enjoyed in the world of Brahman. So how many zeros have you got now on that figure? B, we gave you a Dharma. How's the Dharma going? Phyllis, did you come up with a figure? You have to unmute yourself. We multiplied 100 by 100 by 100 by 100. I think it's 10 to the power 14. I did it once in class. What did you come up with?
12,
I thought I had 10.
minus
10 to the power of 10.
I got 12.
All right. Well, it's a very big number. I one time I did it and I got 14, but don't trust my math. Okay, but what's the point? 10 to the power of 10, 12, 14. The bliss of Brahman is 10 to the power. Let's go with 12 in the middle. 10 to the power of 12, more blissful than the perfect imagined human being on earth, a king who owns the, who has perfect health, good looking. In another passage is identical to this, but adds a few adjectives, good looking king, etc., etc. So obviously this is rhetorical, obviously, but now we know what such an Ananda is supposed to mean. That Ananda is not just, another kind of pleasure, that can rival my cappuccino in the morning. It's 10 to the power of 12 greater than anything we can conceive of in this world. So that's what the yogis seek. They're seeking that bliss. On the one hand, they don't want to suffer anymore. So that's the sort of, you could say that's the initial impetus. But by seeking the Ātman, we are told, the Ātman is actually the seat of bliss, and that bliss is infinitely greater than anything we know of in our little frame of reference. All right. So now we get the first reference to reincarnation. Oh no, not yet. It's like this. As a heavily loaded cart goes along creaking, so this bodily self saddled with this Ātman of knowledge, the bodily Ātman. Sometimes Ātman can be used to refer to the body, sometimes the mind, sometimes the real Ātman. Ātman just means the self. Just like in English, we can say the soul in a sort of deep theological sense, or we can just say, oh, that poor soul, in a more sort of surface level sort of way. As a heavily loaded cart goes along creaking, so this Ātman, the bodily self, saddled with the Ātman of knowledge, that's Chit, goes along groaning as his breathing is last. Right? We're getting old. Some of us are getting old. We've got some creaks and groans. If you're like me, lower back pain. Now, a man grows feeble on account of either old age or sickness. It is like this. Notice there's a lot of these sort of natural metaphors because, they're in the forest, many of them. So as a mango or a fig or a berry detaches itself from its stem, so this person frees himself from the bodily parts and rushes along the same path and through the same opening back again to a new life. This is one of the earliest references in Sanskrit literature to reincarnation. We don't find any reference to reincarnation in the Rig Vedas and the four Vedas. We have one word that says punarmrityu, again, death. But the Upanishads, the Brihad, is the first time that we have clear reference to what becomes ubiquitous in all the Indian traditions, Buddhist chain and Hindu, Tantrika, everything, reincarnation. And here's the first little, very kind of simplistic, metaphoric reference to it. Just like a fig or a berry detach itself from the stem, and I presume the idea is the berry falls off the tree and goes in the ground, and the seeds in the berry then produce another tree, because that's how nature regenerates itself, or a fig or a mango. I'm assuming that's the intention here. So the person frees himself from the bodily parts when you die, rushes along the same path, the nadis. In one of the later Upanishads that talk about the nadis, the channels that the soul leaves the body, and Vedanta has a whole section in Pada 3 or 4 about how the soul leaves the body. What are the channels? They're called the nadis. Later becomes highly developed in later Tantrika traditions and Hatha Yoga traditions, the idea of nadis. Patanjali is not interested in them, but Tantra is. But here, that too has its the notion of the subtle physiology has its earliest expression here. And it rushes through the same opening back again to a new life. Now we'll get another reference to reincarnation. Again, a sort of like forest-like using forest-like imagery. It's like this. As a caterpillar, so here's a blade, here's a tip of his grass, and here's another piece of grass. So the caterpillar kind of rears itself up. It's got its back part on this piece of grass. It leans over to the next piece of grass and it pulls itself over. So that's a metaphor. As a caterpillar, when it comes to the tip of the blade of grass, reaches out to a new foothold and draws itself onto it. So the Ātman, after it's knocked down this body and rendered it unconscious, death, it reaches out to a new foothold and draws itself onto it. See how it's not philosophized. It's quite beautiful, though. Patanjali, he gives a much more technical definition of reincarnation, right? Jati ayubhoga, telhada paritapa, punya hetutvat, right? You get your birth and your lifespan and your quality of life is based on, and they're pleasant or unpleasant, depending on whether you've been pious or impious. So the sutra tradition then systematizes it, theorizes it more philosophically, but not the Upanishads. But yet it all has its roots here in very beautiful ways. So non-systematic, non-philosophized, non-theorized, but profound, my friends. It's like this. Okay, it's like this. As a weaver, I've got to look that up in Sanskrit. What would it be? It's like this. I'm really curious now. Give me a second. I want to see what it is in Sanskrit. So where are we? We're in the Brihad 4. Brihad 4. The next time you do your teaching, then you can say this. 443. So 443. Tadyata. Like this. Tadyata, like yata. Tad, like this. Tadyata. So it's like this. Like what? As a weaver, after she, he's being politically correct now. We've got a he up there and a she down here. That's what we have to do now in academia. We have to mix up our she's and he's. After she has removed the colored yarn, right? So knit something and then you pull it apart. Weaves a different design, right? You knit a sweater, get sick of it, save the wool, knit something else that is newer and more attractive. So the self, after it's knocked down this body, notice he's repeating it. We're familiar with Upanishadic style, right? You change the metaphor and then you keep the refrain. We've had that so many times. After it's knocked down this body and rendered it unconscious, makes himself a different figure that is newer and more attractive, a forefather, a Gandharva, celestial being, or a god. And notice the small g, that's not Ishvara. That would be big G. Oop, what did I just do? How did I do that? How do I get this back? Get it to go big again. I gotta cut you out of the way because you're all up there. And get this out of the way. And there we are. 72. Oh gosh, I don't know what I did. And this
The 100.
No, I'm trying
to plus.
Oh, there we are.
Press the plus symbol.
All right, there we are. Thank you. I'll make it 150. All right, let me get this out of the way. So, all right, then. So these are then the very, very earliest expressions of reincarnation, and here now a little bit more systematic, a little bit more philosophically rigorous. And now we can echo Patanjali. Remember that your jati ayobhoga, your birth, this is Patanjali 213, 214, 215. That klesha mula karmashaya drishta janma vedaniya, that your kleshas trigger action, and that triggers that manifests in the future life. And what is that? Sati mole tad vipaka jati ayobhoga. As long as we act with desire, we create jati ayobhoga. We create bodies, lifespans, and quality of life, and tehlada paritapa punya hetutvat. And these bodies and lifespans that we have, my friends, are happy or distressful. Obviously, he's painting black and white. We have to fill in the shades of gray. They are happy or distressful, punya, punya, depending on pious or impious deeds. Now, look, here it is. Hence, there is this saying. Notice that the Upanishads are quoting things older than them. And of course, what does the tradition say about that? Tradition doesn't say there's anything older than the Upanishads. They say, oh, they're just being rhetorical. They're being rhetorical when they say, oh, thus it is said, or the ancients used to say, the Vedanta realizes that, well, this is a problem. If you're going to say something is eternal, then it can't be quoting something older. So how do they deal with it when the Upanishads say this? They say, oh, it's just being rhetorical. It's just they're doing it for pedagogical purposes. There's a saying, he's made of this, he's made of that. What a man turns out to be depends on how he acts. It's karma. Now, much more, a little bit more philosophical in the Weaver and the other passages. If his actions are good, he'll turn into something good. If his actions are bad, he will turn into something bad. A man turns into something good by good action and into something bad by bad action. And so people say a person here consists simply of desire. Because you desire, and according to desire, you act. And if you act bad, you bad result. If you act good, good result. But both action is always predicated on desire. You don't act without an initial trigger to action. That's a desire. So therefore, a person consists, there's one way of thinking about it, it's everything is just desire. When you initiate an action, you initiate it for a reason. That's a desire. But listen, this is quite nice. A person here consists of desire. Then a man resolves in accordance with desire. Then you make a resolution. Okay, I desire this. Now I'm going to resolve to attain it. And then he acts in accordance with his resolve. Then you act and so that's action. And then what happens? Well, then you turn out to be in accordance with his action. Then you get the fruit. And then you end up with some karma coming your way in this life or the next, Patanjali says. But notice this nice little four-part schema, right? It's all desire. So people say a person here consists simply of desire. We're in this world and we get to desire, my friends. We have a mind. And that mind controls the body. And according to how we use the mind, you control the body, we control our actions, we control our behaviors, we control our relationships. So what is the mind really? Okay, it's desire. You can say it's ignorance and ego, but we don't see those things. But we do see desire. We have control over desire. Our vidya is so deep rooted, we can theorize it's there, but we can't perceive our vidya out of the five kleshas. We can't see ignorance. We can't see ego. Sometimes we can. We see our ego. Okay, fine. But really, it's desire that we can see from moment to moment. So a person here consists of desire. All right, I'm hungry. I'm going to get up, eat something. Tired. I desire to sleep every second. So a person consists of desire. Four parts, four steps. Then one resolves based on that desire. Step number 2, resolution. Step number 3, according to that resolve, sorry, I missed one. Desire, then resolve, then act. Then you act according to your resolve, and then you act. The resolve says, okay, I want this now, and then you act. Let me get it. And then you turn out to be. You get the karmic consequence in accordance with that action. On this point, there's the following verse. Notice the Upanishads quoting an older verse. Again, scholars would say, yeah, of course they do. They're written by humans and it's chronological and it's historical and they're older texts. We don't have any reference to this other than what does the tradition say? How can they be quoting an older verse? They would just say it's a pedagogical device. It's a narrative device to impart the teaching. So what does the verse say? A man who's attached. If you have detachment, same as desire. A man who acts out of a desire, you can call that attached. Big word in the Gita. A man who's attached goes with his action to that very place to which his mind and character cling. Gita, end of chapter 6. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajate antikale varam tam tamevitaro sada bhava bhavita. Whatever you think of at the moment of death, whatever your mind's clinging to, whatever's been the most important to a desire in your life, that's where you go. Here it is. So there's 2 principles in reincarnation. One is pious impious activity. Patanjali stresses but one is the state of mind at the moment of death. It's a different principle. The Gita stresses. Upanishads are saying both. Up here it's saying good, bad, your morals, but here it's what do you cling to at the moment of death? What state is the mind in? Two different principles. Of course, they can interact together. It can be a combination of both. A man who's attached goes with his action to that very place to which his mind and character cling, reaching the end of actions when he dies of whatever he's done in this world. From that world, he returns back to this world, back to action. So then you die, go to some other world according to your karma, and then you come back again. There's probably a reference to the celestial realm. And indirectly, it's a dig at the Vedic people. Sure, you can go to that world, but then you come back when the action expires. Now, that's the course of a man who desires. If we die with desires, we go to some other world, and then we come back down and start all over again. That's the course of a man who desires. Now, a man who does not desire, who is without desires, who is freed from desires, right? The whole goal of yoga, every single yoga, Buddhism, Jainism, everything. Read the Gita, verse up the verse, up the verse, up the verse. Who is freed from desires, whose desires are fulfilled, and here's whose only desire is the self, or mumuksha. His prana does not depart. Brahmani is, and to Brahmani goes. That's liberation. That's the Upaniṣadic way of saying he gets liberated. On this point, there is the following verse. Now, there's another verse, right? That's the verse up there is for those who die with desires, conventional. What about the liberated? When they're all banished, those desires lurking in one's heart, we got these desires lurking about in our hearts. Then a mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman in this world. Svarupe Vastanam, you don't have to die. We're supposed to be able to attain these states in this world. So this is all the earliest teachings of reincarnation we find in Sanskrit literature. And on. It's like this. As a snake's, how do you pronounce that? Slough or slough, whatever, right? The skin of a snake, lifeless and discarded, lies on an anthill, so lies this corpse. Right? The snake sheds its skin and then goes off and does something else. So that's what the Ātman does. But this non-corporeal and immortal life breath, sometimes that's the subtle body, is nothing but Brahman, nothing but light. Hey, another 1,000 cows for Yajnavalkya from the king of Janaka. So he's doing quite well for himself, is Yajnavalkya. So Caterpillar turns out to be 67. And what are we doing for time? Oh my goodness, we're still on the Brihad. But that doesn't matter. There's no rush. Why should I say something like that? Right, and we're familiar with this, right? The breathing behind breathing, it's repeated so many times. The sight beside sight, the hearing behind hearing, we're all familiar with this. Here, with the mind alone must one behold it. This might be something that, the Sabija Samadhi, such as Asmita Samadhi. I am. This is a state of mind. It's not near Bija. It's not the whole final grand finale. It's still one step away. With the mind alone, one must behold it. Now, here's a monistic statement. Remember monism, dualism? There is here nothing diverse at all. No diversity, no duality. It's another monistic verse. From death to death he goes who he sees here any kind of diversity. If we think dualistically, we keep getting reborn. This Shankara loves this verse. But the theists have a different sort of, they would say nothing diverse. For the theists is, well, everything's God. That doesn't mean that the soul is God. So the theists and the monists have different ways of reading this, but that's not something for our workshop this time round. By knowing that very one, the Ātman, a wise Brahmin should obtain insight for himself. Let him not ponder over a lot of words. It just tires the voice. How about that? Let him not ponder all this reading and studying and all this big pontification. It just dies the voice. If you don't know the Atman, what's the point of it all? Isn't that lovely? So there is humor and wit and sarcasm, and these are human minds. And clearly, this author of this is not particularly impressed with kind of punditry, scholasticism. They call it punditry, panditva. Right? This immense unborn self is none other than the one consisting of perception here among the vital. It's among the prana. It's behind the prana. Sometimes, by the way, prana is equated with Brahman, but that's another story. But here it's among. It's not the prana, it's among them. There in that space within the heart, okay? Because the Atman is a substance and it permeates the body. So it has to have some sort of geographical point of origin from which it pervades the body, and that's considered to be the heart. In the space within the heart, sometimes called the cave. He lies, the Atman, the controller of all, the Lord of all, the ruler of all. The Atman does not become more by good actions or anyway less by bad actions. The body does. Get a bad body, bad lifespan, bad quality of life, but the Atman isn't. It's just consciousness with whatever body it's in. It doesn't get affected by its karmic embodiment. So he does not become more by good actions or less by bad actions. He's the Lord of all. He's the ruler of creatures. He's the guardian of creatures. He's the dike separating these worlds so they would not mingle with one another. Purusha Prakriti, a distinct world, distinct metaphysical entities. One is pure consciousness, one is gross unconscious. Sankhya, Karikas at the beginning. One is Chit, one is Achit. One is Sat, one is Asat. One is ever moving, one is stationary. One is the seer, one is the seen. There's so many ways you can frame it, but it's a dike separating the two worlds, one conscious, one unconscious, so they would not mingle with each other. It is he that real Brahmins, not just ritualists, the real Brahmins seek to know by means of Vedic recitation. These are means to try to seek the Atman. Krishna's going to say, okay, you want to do Vedic ritualism, but do it as a dharma. Don't do it because you want attain some celestial realm, or you just do it as your duty without attachment to the fruit. That's the basic teaching of the Gita, Karma Yoga. So it's he that Brahmins seek to know by Vedic recitation, by sacrifice, by gift giving, by austerity and fasting. It's the Atman. That's the ultimate goal. It is he, on knowing whom a man becomes a sage, a seer, a rishi. It is when they desire him as their world, not the celestial world, the Atman. It's when they desire him that wandering ascetics, with still India today, you have tens of millions of wandering ascetics. Now you can't even count them. You see them in the Kumbh Melas when they come out. It's big Kumbh Melas, every 4 years. You've seen pictures, or you've seen it on the telly. It's when they desire him as their world that wandering ascetics undertake the ascetic life of wandering. No, they don't want any attachment. They don't want to be attached to anything. Well, the best way of doing that is just wander. Don't even get attached to it. They say you're not even allowed to stay under the same tree for 3 days because desire is so insidious. You become attached to your tree. 3 days, and then you got to move on. So, is when they know this Atman, that men of old did not desire offspring, which is what materialistic person doesn't want kids? Well, maybe a few, but certainly no Vedic people. Is when they reasoning. What do they reason? The ones who do not desire offspring. Ours is the self, and it is our world. Our offspring is the self. What then is the use of offspring for us? Make a t-shirt of that. Somebody make a t-shirt. What then is the use of offspring for us? We seek the Atman. So they gave up the desire for sons, the desire for wealth, the desire for worlds. This is all that the Vedic ritualist wants, exactly this. You do Vedic rituals for offspring, wealth, and the worlds means the celestial realm in the next life. So what do? They give all that up and then do what? And undertake the mendicant life. The desire for sons, after all, is the same as the desire for wealth. And the desire for wealth is the same as the desire for worlds. They're simply desires. And then we have our neti again. About this self, one can only say, na iti, na iti. He's ungraspable, remember? Repetition, he can't be grasped, he's undecaying, not subject to decay. Nothing sticks to him, doesn't stick to anything, not bound. Okay, so it'd be nice to finish the, shall we finish the, yeah. Well, actually, we are finished. These are the verses I had marked down for us, my friends. And what are we, 50, 1 hour and 50. And I guess we do the Chandogya. And, you know, if we don't fit, I want to read some, I want to read stuff with you. And if we don't finish it in 6 sessions, we'll add a couple of sessions. Well, what do I care? If you want some more, because the later Upanishads are going to be much more user-friendly. So I think that's it. I think we do need to move on, and I guess it makes sense to take questions now. We haven't quite done it, unless we want to do one more verse. I love this. I love that verse though. Let him not ponder over lots of words. It just tires the voice. You know, it's funny because I'm just packing. I've got a collection of Indological books. It must be 3,000 or 4,000 that I've collected over 40 years, running around India, all little tiny publishers down some alleyway. But I have this massive collection of books, and half here, and I'm just packing them all. I'm giving a whole lot away, my friends, everything. I finally found a worthy institute, and it's such a pleasure. And just keep a few canonical texts at this point in my life, no more scholasticism, you know, a few canonical texts, and just go deep into those. So that's a little bit, I think, in the mood of this. Finally got there at the age of 65 after 40 years of collecting. All right. So I'm just going to find out. I may have a little list here, but pretty much. Well, you know what? This might be interesting because the knowledge of reincarnation was in the Upanishads. Claim it was not with the Brahmins, but with the warrior caste. You know, and historians, you know, speculate about why that is. But let me see if I can find that passage. It's not in this one. The same story was repeated twice. But we'll read this one. It must be in another Upanishad, and we're sticking with the Brihad right now. So we'll go to 6.2. But notice that that here we have a Brahmin going to a warrior. And it's kind of unusual. And, you know, I'm not sure the tradition really discusses it. You'd think they would, you know, the real Vedantins. Here we are, Shvetaketu, another kind of figure in the Upanishad, son of Aruni, okay, came one day into the assembly of the land of Panchala, right? So this is another kingdom, and approached Javala Pravahana while people were waiting upon him. I think he's a king, and Shvetaketu is a Brahmin. Seeing Shvetaketu, he said, son. Shvetaketu replied, sir. Jaivali asked, did your father teach you? Shvetaketu replied, yes. Of course, his father taught him about Vedic ritualism, because most Brahmins are, you know, they're handing down knowledge of rituals. This is our last verse, my friends, and then we'll stop. Okay. So he says, did he teach you? Yes. Do you know how people, when they die, go by different paths? And, you know, there's going to be the path of the light and path of the dark. We even see it in the Gita. Don't want to get into it. But that's not relevant. No, he replied. Do you know how they return to this world? No, he replied. Do you know how the world beyond is not filled up, even as more and more people continuously go there, right? Everyone's going to the celestial realm. Why doesn't it fill up? In other words, the kid doesn't know about reincarnation, that you go up and you come back down. That's why it doesn't get filled up. Do you know how the world beyond is not filled up, even as more and more people continuously go there? No, he replied. And this, we don't, this is the sort of thing where we don't understand. Do you know the oblation at whose offering the water, taking on a human voice, rises up and speaks? So that's some kind of a Vedic, it's a reference to some kind of a Vedic ritual. And we might read the commentaries, but the commentaries are 2,000 years later, Shankara. So, or 1,500 years later. But anyway, that's not the point. No, he replied. Do you know the access to the path of the gods? Remember, small g, I prefer to translate it celestial, so we don't get it mixed up with God with a big G, Ishvara. This is not Ishvara. Do you know the access to the path of the celestials, or the path of the ancestors, fathers? That is, anyway, so he goes on. I don't know the answer of any of these, this Brahmin kid replied. Then Jaivali invited him to stay. He said, okay, stay with me and I'll teach you, but he's a Kshatriya. And this kid is a punk Brahmin, unlike his father, who is humble. He's a punk Brahmin. He's like a caste Brahmin. He thinks he's a Brahmin. Oh, I'm not going to learn from a Kshatriya. Disregarding the invitation, the boy ran off. He went back to his father and said, well, and to think you once told me I was well educated, right? He couldn't answer any of these questions. What's the matter, my clever boy? That excuse for a prince. In other words, that too big Kshatriya, lower caste. He asked me 5 questions and I didn't know the answer to a single one of them. What were they? Said the father. Notice the father's a real yogi, not like the proud son. These, he said, and repeated them briefly. The father replied, you know me, son, I've taught you everything I know. Come, let us both go there and live as students. So here we have a Brahmin who only knows, knowledge is only about Vedic ritualism, and knows nothing about the Ātman and Brahman and the Upaniṣadic, what the Upanishads are interested in. So so do you see how it's kind of being, it's putting the caste Brahmins who are ritualists in a lower place. It's sort of putting them in a they're limited in their knowledge. They only know these worldly rituals. But the father's sincere. The kid was offended. He said, I'm not going to learn from you. But not the father. So even though he knows nothing about Ātman and Brahman, even though he was just grew up in a Brahmin family that was all tied up with ritualism, notice how he's sincere and humble. He says, you know me, son. He says, I've taught you everything I know, so I don't know the answer to those questions. Come, let us go there and live as students. He actually wants to know. The kid doesn't. You, sir, can go on your own. I'm not going to study with a low-caste warrior. So Gautama then came, the father went to Pravahana Jaivali's place. He's a Brahmin, so that Jaivali gave him a seat and water, right? Because you have to greet a Brahmin, there's caste protocol. Then he presented himself with the refreshments due to an honored guest and said, we will grant a wish to the Reverend Gautama. When a Brahmin goes to the Kshatriya, the warrior has to bestow a wish. That's the protocol in Vedic India. But you see the point. The point is Upanishadic knowledge is not bound by caste. The fact that a warrior has it and is teaching a Brahmin indicates ritualism, that's a Brahmin thing. You got to study with a Brahmin. Want to do Vedic sacrifice? Have to be a Brahmin. Want to chant Rig Veda? Have to be a Brahmin. Fine. But Atman knowledge, nothing to do with caste. And I think this story, by reversing the relationship, that normally the Brahmin is the teacher, but when it comes to Upanishadic knowledge, anyone can be the teacher, my friends, if they have knowledge, which means you and I here in the West are, if anyone tries to pull some caste nonsense on you, right, sometimes happens in India, someone sticks their nose up, oh, you Westerners are this and that. We are, we're Hindus or we're, this and that, and we have knowledge. Though that person has not understood the first basic lesson of Atma Tattva. It's got nothing to do with body, nothing to do with caste, nothing to do with social or cultural superficialities. So, and the father, at least, was a genuine Brahmin, real Brahmin, realized he is missing something, might have known all the rituals, but didn't know real truth. So here the story is illustrating that. So Gautama said in reply, now that you've promised to grant me a wish, tell me what you told my boy. Notice he doesn't ask for wealth. He doesn't normally go to the king. You say, well, give me an elephant or give me 10,000, 1,000 cows, remember. He's not asking for wealth, so he's a real seeker. Tell me what you told my boy about what happens at death and why does the world up there not fill up? But that, Gautama, is the category of divine wishes, responded Jaivali. Why don't you make a wish of a human sort? Gautama is not interested. As you know, I have my share of gold. I have cows, I got horses, slave girls, sorry, ladies, blankets and cloths. Don't be stingy, Your Honor, in giving me more than that. I don't want any of that material stuff. In giving me the infinite and the boundless. Remember the story of Maitreya when the husband was going up to take sannyas and he says, let me make a settlement. She says, will it make me immortal? And he goes, no. She said, well, then tell me what you know about Brahman. So you see how the Upanishad creates these little stories to communicate to us the importance, number one, of Atman knowledge, and number two, that it trumps caste, it trumps all of that ritualism, it trumps birth, caste by birth. Well, then, Gautama, you'll have to request in the correct manner. You want Atmatapa. Notice Arjuna in the Gita, when he's ready to hear, 2:11, he turns to Krishna, 2:7, and he says, Shishasteham shadimam tvam prapanam. Please instruct me. I'm now your student, and I'm surrendered to you. Cannot receive knowledge of Atman and Bhagavan if there's humility, if there's arrogance. The teacher, a real teacher will just sort of say something superficial and send you, so that you go away. So you'll have to request in the correct manner. I come to you, my Lord, as a pupil. Let's see if that's the same language as the Gita. What verse? Because in the Gita it says, Shishasteham shadimam tvam prapanam. Shishaste, I am your student. Tvam shadhimam, instruct me. Tvam prapanam, bear with me, my friends. 6:10. Oh, wait, we're doing it. Oh, look at the Sanskrit. I want to just see what is the Sanskrit. You should consider learning Sanskrit, my friends. Beautiful thing. Keep dementia at bay. Keep senility at bay. That's got to be a good thing. And you'll be able to look up words and you just absorb your mind. You got to absorb your mind in something. So absorb it in these beautiful teachings. Okay. I come to you, my Lord, as a pupil. Manusham, where are we? What verse is that? 7. Verse 8. Okay. All right, I find it. Upayan Bhavantam. So, all right, I'll do that when we finish. I don't want to hold you up. So, so then we're finishing up now. Yep, we did our 2 hours as promised. And why am I not finding where we are? 6:2. Let's just wrap up this story. We'll take questions. And we don't have kirtan tonight. Do you like kirtan? Would you like to have kirtan every time? Of course, you can always go. I'm sorry, I'm just going to wrap up the story. Right, you'll have to request in the proper manner. I come to you, my Lord, as a pupil. And then with just these words, did the people of old place themselves as pupils under a teacher. This is how you approach the guru. Just humble. And all you need to do is sincerely seek knowledge. Nothing else, nothing else. Guru should not ask for anything else. Of course, the disciple might serve the guru, but guru asks for nothing else, just sincerity. And that means humility. Because if you're arrogant, you think you know everything, you can't hear then. Then don't waste your time. And Gautama lived there openly as a pupil. And look at this. This really is of interest to historians. As before now, this knowledge of death and reincarnation has not resided in any Brahmin. It was with the warriors. So may you, Gautama, your grandfathers, not cause us harm. Don't curse us, because Brahmins can curse. But I will tell it to you. For who can refuse you when you speak like that? No teacher can refuse a student when the student approaches with humility. No, any student, doesn't matter who the student is. All you need is humility, my friends. And then the teacher will teach. So that's the end of our reading this time round. But look at this. As before now, he's a king, warrior. This knowledge has not resided in any Brahmin. The Brahmins don't know it. They don't know the knowledge of reincarnation. How interesting is that? Because elsewhere in the Upanishad, the teachers of the Ātman are all Brahmins. So is this just a narrative? Is this just a sort of a story that's meant to communicate that, you know, caste is irrelevant to, that's how I would read it. It's not really saying that Brahmins didn't have it. And why is it not really saying that? Because everywhere else in the Upanishads, and Yajnavalkya's teaching, he's a Brahmin. So all the other teachings are coming out of the Brahmins. So we can't take this literally, because in the very Upanishads themselves, we see Brahmins teaching this knowledge. So I would take it more as a sort of rhetorical, a narrative device, communicating something else. What is that? That knowledge of Ātman has nothing to do with caste. And sure, the Brahmins teach it, but you don't have to be a Brahmin to teach it. And here we have the example of a warrior. Okay, so there it is, my friends. And we did a nice 2 hours. Isn't that wonderful stuff? Isn't it better than watching telly? If you have a telly, I don't even have a telly. Well, we'll take questions for a half an hour or so. And so let me see some, okay, well, why don't we just have kirtan in the future? And if you don't want to have kirtan, you just go. You don't have to stay, right? You just hit the end meeting button. So we'll get Lakshmi. I did write to someone. I wanted to have, you know, a lady sing as well, not just, you know, guys doing everything. So a beautiful singer in Buenos Aires. And she has a lovely voice, Cecilia. I bought her a harmonium once in India. And I bought this really nice, because she wouldn't know where to go. First time in India. So there's one place in Delhi that make the best harmoniums in India. And they're actually Sikhs, they're Siddhars, you know, the Sikhs. And I left it for her in Vrindavan. She picked it up. So she has this wonderful harmonium. It's just a gift because she has such a beautiful voice. And I just wanted to contribute to her kirtan career or kirtan, future. And she's taken off with it. So it's very gratifying. So I invited her. Well, sorry, that you didn't need to know all of that. But I invited her to chant tonight and she didn't reply. So I think she's a bit off the grid. So when she replies, she'll probably say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get your email." And then maybe we'll have it next week. Okay, Cecilia, lovely, lovely person, with a beautiful voice. Her parents are Krishna Bhaktas, so she's sort of been around this stuff since birth. Questions, my friends?
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Mary Ellen. I have a question about reincarnation.
Yeah.
So the verses that you pointed out earlier on.
Yeah.
The one about the caterpillar and the weaver.
Yeah.
Those verses sound very much like reincarnation is not personal. That it's and it's like one of the things, a real sticking point for me, is when it's taught a lot of times and teachers talk about it, and I've heard it like a million different ways, like something personal is reincarnating. And I don't personally believe that. And so I'm wondering if these verses here are just really saying that, yeah, the Ātman goes from body to body, but it's not personal.
Well, Mary Ellen, there is, these we're not going to get a very elaborate explanation in the Upanishads. Remember, this is pre-philosophy, pre-systematic kind of thinking. But all later traditions would say that there's two entities that transmigrate. So the physical body dies, right, as the Upanishads gets knocked down, to use the language we just read. But there's a consciousness, and that's not personal. You're very right about that. It's just pure consciousness, and your Ātman, in that sense, is metaphysically the same as mine and everybody else's. However, there is a psychic body, the Sukshma Sharira, which is matter. It's material, and that's the mind, the intelligence, the pranas, and everything except the gross elements, actually. There's an actual subtle body, and that transmigrates with the Ātman. Now, your personality in this life, that subtle body has so many personalities, it's had so many lives. Now, what happens is in this particular life, certain clusters of samskaras manifest at birth and that need to be burnt up. Samskaras that planted in the past life and they haven't borne their fruit. So they arise in the mind in the moment of birth, and that sort of is a sort of personality, because those samskaras are mental triggers that sort of, are a certain way, and mine will be different from yours. So we call that personality. Of course, that can change in life, but some of them can change, and obviously we change our personalities, but in some ways also we keep, certain things survive throughout the whole life. But then what happens at death, that whole cluster has been accounted for. So that gets pushed into tamas. They're now burnt. They're like burnt seeds. They can't fructify anymore, but they're still seeds. Like if you burn a coriander seed, it still looks like a seed, but you plant it, can't produce anything anymore. So therefore those, and then in the next life, a different cluster of samskaras activates, maybe dog samskaras, cat samskaras, and you get a different personality. So therefore the Ātman is transpersonal. It's pure consciousness. So that's correct. But the subtle body does have personality, but that personality changes in accordance with which samskaras arise in it that need to be accounted for and burnt and experienced in every particular life. So therefore you could have one personality in this life, and then you burn up all those samskaras and you die, and the next life you're a dog. Now you have a dog personality. It's completely different. But all it means is that there's a different portion or different component of the cycle a different cluster of samskaras is activating in the chitta. All the other samskaras are covered by tamas, and either they're burnt or they're suppressed for some future life yet again. And a particular pocket of samskaras activate that needs to be accounted for, and they're accommodated in the body that's best suited for them, whether that be a dog or a tree or another human being with a very different personality. Now, it could also be the case that some samskaras are so strong, they might actually survive from one birth to another. So you might actually have, still, you didn't finish them all in one human life. Some of them still need another. So there might be some traits of personality that can actually flow over into the next life, but they're not eternal. You don't have an eternal personality, of course not. Once they're burnt up, then another cluster of samskaras activates, and that so-called personality, which simply means those samskaras that needed to be experienced, eventually they, either in this life or let's say spills over into 2, fine, or 5, it doesn't matter. But the point is they're not eternal, they're not connected with the Ātman in any sort of deep level way. The Ātman remains just pure consciousness. So there's a yes and a no. It's yes, you're right that the consciousness is transpersonal, but the psychic body has, at a beginningless time, we've had so many births. All those personalities of all our past births are all recorded in the mind. And each life, some of that reactivates, and a bunch of new samskaras that we created, and maybe in the past life, they need to be accounted for. So we're ever creating new personalities, and they're all lodged. A personality is, let's be clear about what a personality is in yoga psychology, nothing other than a cluster of samskaras that dominates the mind in a particular life. It dominates it because it needs to be experienced and burnt and accounted for. And we call that personality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Edwin,
Yeah.
it's Sylvia.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi. Okay, I came to this teaching kind of late in life. Now, I know you had told me once that nothing is wasted. You take it on to the next life, like the knowledge that we get. What about, does that preclude being self-realized in this life? Is there like no chance anymore because I came to it very late in life?
No, of course not. It's got nothing to do with time. It only has to do with intention. You remember Patanjali says it's close for those who are intense, it's middle for those who are middling, and it's, a little further away for those but anything is good. But no, if you're intense, there's nothing to do with when you started, when you didn't start. Sylvia, anybody can do that. All we have to do is resolve. Remember, even the Upanishads, you act according to your resolve. We just read that. You desire, and then you resolve, and then you act. So let's say you desire the Atman, then you resolve that can be klishta or aklishta. Remember, Patanjali can be klishta or aklishta. You can desire and act and resolve for mundane, for material things, but the same process works in the aklishta. You desire the Atman, you resolve, you act, and then you turn out to be. You attain liberation or you don't. So never think that.
So at the moment of death,
Yeah.
if you desire the Atman, then there's a chance you can be self-realized if you desire the Atman, or if you focus on it.
Well, you have to be completely free of desires, because any desire still in the mind has to fructify. And if you're dying with them in the mind, it's too late to get rid of them in that life. Then you have to come back, but you might come back at a very advanced place. You might come back as a natural yogi and you know, like a really, you know, and a very young age attracted to yoga. So if you don't finish, you know, you can finish, but even if you don't, why not put as much spiritual money in the bank account, then you're born with it next life.
I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Subhash Maharaj Boliye. Subhash ji, Subhash Mittal. You have your, Subhash ji, you have to put your unmute. Unmute the button. Press unmute. You don't know how to do that? I can't hear you. Prabhuji, hum kuch nahi. You have to hit the unmute button, otherwise no good. You see on the far left, you see the far left of the screen, there's the first icon on the left, it says mute. All right, let's unmute everybody. How do you unmute everybody? Let's do this. Why did I do that? Mute. Oh, chat. No participants. Okay, let's unmute everybody. There we are. Oops, it's not letting me do that. I don't know how to unmute. Why don't I know how to
He just sent us a chat saying that it's his microphone that's not working.
Then I can't help you. Then I can't help you. Next week, huh? Is it okay? Next week you get first question. Is that okay? Okay. Anybody else have a question, my friends?
Hi, Edwin.
Edwin, I have a question.
Yeah. Is that Leslie? There's Leslie. Varchini, right? Yeah, Varchini.
It's Mary.
Any somebody had a question? Sorry, who was that?
Edwin?
Yes.
Yeah, Edwin, it's Mary Fleming.
Oh, Mary. Hi, Mary.
You said earlier that sometimes Brahma or hi.
Mary, we're not getting reception. Just
earlier that
Mary, you can't hear
sometimes
you.
Brahma is equated with prana, or prana is equated with Brahma.
Yeah.
And is Hare also equated with?
We're not getting your sound, Mary, but sometimes in the Upanishads it seems to correlate prana with Brahman. Vedanta says not the Vedanta Sutra has to deal with this. How Brahman is not supposed to be prana. Prana is a kind of prakritic thing. So the job of the Vedanta Sutra is to harmonize this. Pardon? Mary, I'll send you a recorded message on WhatsApp, okay? I heard your question. I'll send you a WhatsApp message because we can't hear you. Okay? Anybody else got a question? Because Mary has access to as many questions as she wants. Thank you, Mary. Anybody else, my friends? Because if not, I will bid you good night. It's only 8:01. How is it 8:01? Oh, I thought we was okay. I'm confused. I thought, why? But then we ended it early then, didn't we? I thought it was 8 o'clock when we ended. What was I looking at? You know what I was looking at? I was looking at the little clock where it says share screen. What clock is that? See, that says 2:20. See that? Oh, you know why? Oh, because I had my camera on 20 minutes before class, and it's the clock up there was been ticking away since I had it 20 minutes before class. I was looking at that clock. I'm so sorry. So now I know not to do that. So we only had an hour and 40 minutes, but it's all good, my friends. It's all good. Anybody got any questions?
Hi, Edwin. It's Pasha.
Pasha.
I was just wondering, while we realize, at least theoretically, that the Ātman is untouched by anything, heat and cold, pain and pleasure, how do we remain composed when our physical body is being insulted, teased, scolded, heartbroken, etc., when we feel so strongly with the emotional and mental pain, yet knowing at the back of our head that our body is not the Ātman? Should we just invalidate the senses and perception while we haven't naturally reached Chitta Vritti Nirodha?
You can't do it without practice, Pasha. You know, it's just theoretical. You have to have a practice, a meditation practice, a japa practice that you take seriously every single morning. And during that practice, you cultivate detachment from the mind by fixing the mind on your mantra or whatever your practice is. Without a solid daily practice, Patanjali says, Nirantarya, without interruption, you know, Dirghakala, for a long time, you can't. It's just theory. And the minute your heart gets broken or your body, and then it all goes flying out the window and you react just like anybody else does. So the test of that, of your practice as opposed to theory is the product of practice. Without sadhana, it's just book learning. It's words. So there has to be a practice by which daily, we make that effort. We get up before we go out in the world and we practice stepping back from the mind, stepping away from the body, absorbing consciousness in the mantra. To the extent we can do that in our japa, to that extent we're able to do it when calamities hit us. Without practice, it's not useless, but it's just theory. So the only answer to that question is, if you don't have a meditative practice, Patanjali is very clear, abhyasa, right? It's vairagya, it is vairagya, and what is it? Abhyasa vairagya, that involves, and that is dirghakala, and for a long time, nirantarya, without any exception. Without that, minute some little ripple in our world, and we react just like anybody else, just like somebody who's no philosophy whatsoever. So practice is the only way.
Thank you.
Everyone agrees on that. Jains, Buddhists, everybody. Any more questions? I'm sorry about the lost 20 minutes. No, that was a good piece of information. I learned something. Susan, nice to have your name come up. All right, my friends. Everybody, Jai Sri Radhe Sham. Come on, Leslie, up with hands. Jai Sri Radhe Sham. We'll see you next week. We move on to the Chandogya and the Taittiriya, and not too many from the Chandogya. And then the Upanishads you're going to get the most out of are the later ones. It's going to be like reading the Gita, the Mundaka and the Katha. We may need to add a couple of sessions, I think, which we can do if we want to. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Edwin.
All right.
Thank you, Edwin.
Jai Sri Radhe.
Night.